The hum of the open-floor office drifted into the kitchenette like background static. I leaned against the counter, savoring the smoky flavor of a brisket taco from the food truck down the street. It was my small daily ritual, a 10-minute escape from the endless cycle of system monitoring, code reviews, and quiet problem-solving that kept Nexora Logistics humming. The smell of coffee and reheated noodles mingled in the fluorescent light. Through the glass wall, I could see the operations floor, a maze of cubicles and screens blinking with fleet locations and delivery ETAs. A small red flash pulsed on the corner of a monitor near the break room door. One truck, 20 minutes behind schedule. My system rarely hiccuped, but I noticed everything. I chewed slowly, filing the thought away. The door swung open, and a sharp chill cut through the warm air of the kitchenette. Victoria Hale entered, heels clicking on the linoleum, posture rigid as if she owned the place. Technically, she did at least the technology side of it. She was the new director of operations tech, the self-proclaimed visionary who had breezed in from another logistics firm 3 months ago. Her eyes swept the room like a queen inspecting her court, and then locked on me. "Calder," she said, skipping any greeting. "My office." Now. The taco turned to paste in my mouth. I set it down carefully, wiped my fingers on a napkin, and followed her across the floor. Conversations dimmed as we passed. People had seen this walk before. It rarely ended well. I kept my face neutral, but a cold knot formed in my stomach. Her office smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and the faint perfume of ambition. Sunlight bounced off the polished mahogany desk, and in the center sat a thick, ominous folder. My name was printed on the tab. "Sit," she said, already lowering herself into her leather chair. I obeyed, the cushion cold under me, for a heartbeat. The only sound was the soft rustle of paper as she opened the folder with the finality of a judge reading a verdict. I clasped my hands in my lap, steady and silent. The small red flash I'd noticed in the kitchenette replayed in my mind like a quiet signal. Somewhere in the building, a clock had started ticking. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her fingers laced together, the termination folder open like a weapon between us. Her voice was smooth, clinical. "Maris, I've reviewed your performance and your approach. You're talented, no one disputes that. But you've become a lone wolf. You overcomplicate processes. You resist collaboration. And frankly," she paused, her eyes narrowing, "any developer can replace you." The words hit like a cold splash of water. I didn't flinch. I had known this was coming since the first meeting where she presented my architecture diagrams as her own strategic innovations. Since she had insisted I document every function of the fleet management platform like I was training my replacement, I let her continue, nodding slightly as if we were discussing someone else. "You'll receive 2 weeks severance," she said. "Your keycard access will end today. It is already transferring system ownership to the new team. Fresh blood, new energy. It's just business." Her words dissolved into background noise as a reel of memories unspooled in my mind. The server room at 2 a.m., its hum like a living heartbeat, while I monitored load balancing logs after a snowstorm rerouted half the fleet. Nights when my only company was the smell of overheated servers and the blinking green of healthy systems. Hours spent designing algorithms that could adapt to last-minute route changes, shaving off fuel costs, keeping deliveries precise. My invisible labor had become the company's spine. I stood when she finished, slow and deliberate, and extended my hand. She blinked, surprised, before giving it a brief shake. "Thank you for your clarity," I said. My voice was calm, almost gentle. I turned and walked out of her office, past rows of people typing as if nothing had changed. At my desk, I powered down my computer and slid my small stack of personal items into a tote bag. A pen, a mug, a flash drive with my notes. Pieces of a life that no one in this building truly understood. I swiped out of the building into the bright Austin sun, feeling the heat on my face and the quiet steel of resolve forming in my chest as I crossed the parking lot. The Texas sun hit me like a wall as I stepped into the parking lot. My tote bag slung over one shoulder. Heat radiated off the asphalt, the scent of tar and sun-baked metal rising around me, in my hand. I clutched a small USB drive, just my personal notes, design sketches, and reminders that no one else in that building would ever bother to understand. I paused by my car and let the silence settle behind me. Nexora's headquarters shimmered in the heat, the glass facade hiding a hive of people who believed they had just cut away dead weight. I could almost hear the hum of servers through the walls, running the systems I had built, systems that would tolerate carelessness only for so long. I designed my architecture with what I thought of as defensive complexity. It wasn't malicious, and it wasn't sabotage. It was engineering honesty if someone tried to simplify the code without understanding the underlying logic. The system wouldn't crash immediately. Instead, it would begin to drift, making subtle mistakes that would grow more costly over time. A route slightly less efficient, a load balancer taking a fraction too long to adjust, a database cache that slowly choked on itself because a maintenance script wasn't run in the right order. That was the truth Victoria never grasped. She thought software was like furniture from a warehouse store. Swap the worker, follow the diagram, and everything stays the same. But this system wasn't a flat-pack chair, it was a living organism, and she had just severed the only person who knew its pulse. I opened my car door, letting the heat roll out, and slid into the driver's seat. My fingers brushed the USB in my bag, a small reminder of the years I'd poured into building something bulletproof against incompetence, but never against arrogance. I started the engine and let the AC fight the heat, my thoughts sharp and cold. I wouldn't make a scene. I wouldn't send a single warning. I would wait. The first slip would come soon enough, and then the second, and then the cascade. I pulled out of the lot with the quiet satisfaction of someone who already knew how this story would unfold. 2 days later, I sat at a cafe on South Congress. The hum of traffic and the smell of roasted coffee drifting in with the warm breeze. My iced coffee left a ring of condensation on the small metal table, and for the first time in years, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease. No blinking alerts demanding my attention, no late-night emails, no quiet expectation that I'd sacrifice another weekend to keep the fleet moving. I scrolled through my phone lazily, skimming news headlines, until a notification lit up the screen, a text from Leo Martinez. Hey Maris, not sure if you care anymore. But the system's acting sluggish. Delivery ETAs are all over the place. New dev team looks lost. I leaned back, letting the condensation bead and drip down the cup, a slow smile forming on my lips. Leo had been with Nexora longer than I had. A man who understood the weight of a late delivery and the quiet miracles my software performed daily. He wasn't the type to panic. I typed back, "Sorry to hear that. Have you flagged it to Victoria?" A pause. Then his reply buzzed in, "Yeah, she says the new guys are handling it. Between they keep asking for documentation that doesn't exist. They look like they're drowning." I stirred my coffee with the straw, watching the ice swirl. Of course they were. The manuals I'd left behind told them how to operate the system, not how to understand it. The real map of the architecture lived in my head, in my habits, in the intuition that came from years of trial and error. The cafe door opened and closed, people coming and going, laughter and chatter spilling onto the sidewalk. I felt like a ghost watching a different world. 2 days ago, I had been chained to that building, my worth measured in deadlines met and problems silently solved. Now, I was free, sipping coffee while the machine I'd built began whispering its first warnings. I let the phone rest face down on the table, savoring the cool bitterness on my tongue. Somewhere across town, the cracks were widening, and I didn't need to lift a finger. By Friday morning, the slow unraveling had turned into a full-blown corporate disaster. My phone buzzed nonstop with texts from former colleagues, each message painting a clearer picture of the chaos at Nexora. Fleets were being dispatched to the wrong distribution centers. Drivers were sitting idle for hours, and the dispatch board looked like a Christmas tree of red alerts. The COO, a man I'd only ever seen composed and calculating, was reportedly storming across the operations floor, shouting for answers no one could give him. Then the messages from clients began trickling in. One of the regional logistics managers I'd spoken to during system demos years ago found me on LinkedIn. Maris, we've got 3 shipments late and your system is not the same. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long moment, my finger hovering over the keyboard. My absence had become a problem large enough to breach the walls of the company and reach me directly. That was the moment the truth settled in with a quiet weight. My absence wasn't just a gap. It was a product. A marketable product that suddenly had a value far beyond my old paycheck. Instead of replying, I slipped my phone into my pocket and laced up my hiking boots. I drove to the Barton Creek Greenbelt, the city fading behind me as the trail wound through trees and limestone cliffs. The murmur of water and the crunch of gravel under my feet felt like freedom pressed into every sense. I stopped at an overlook where sunlight danced on the creek, and for the first time in months, I inhaled without the heaviness of obligation pressing on my chest. Somewhere downtown, people were scrambling, sweating, and apologizing for decisions they didn't understand. I pictured Victoria standing in the middle of that storm, the weight of every late shipment and angry client resting squarely on her polished shoulders. I sat on a warm rock, letting the sun seep into my skin, and smiled at the stillness around me. They were learning the lesson I'd never needed to teach out loud. I wouldn't have to call. I just had to wait for the phone to ring. Monday morning arrived with the quiet satisfaction of a weekend spent in freedom. I brewed tea instead of coffee, savoring the slower rhythm of my new life. When my phone lit up with a name I had expected but refused to chase, Victoria Hale, I let it ring twice before answering, my voice calm. "Good morning." "Victoria Maris," she said, her tone tight, the edges frayed. "We're experiencing some minor hiccups in the system. Nothing critical, just a few operational slowdowns." I stirred honey into my tea and waited. The pause on my end stretched until she finally exhaled, the facade cracking. "Okay," she admitted, her voice low. "The dispatch automation is failing, ETAs are wrong, and the COO is under pressure. We could use your guidance to stabilize things." There it was, the first bend of pride. "I see," I said softly. "And you want me to come in as, what, an employee again? A consultant?" She said quickly. "Just a few hours. We'll compensate you for your time." I set my cup down, leaning back against the counter as sunlight slanted across the kitchen tile. This was the moment I had prepared for. The one she'd never imagined when she slid that termination folder across the desk. "My consulting rate," I said evenly, "is $250 an hour, 4-hour minimum." I could practically hear her swallow the words like jagged glass. $250 an hour. That's the market rate for an emergency specialist with my level of system knowledge. I let the silence linger before delivering the final turn of the knife. If any developer can replace me. "Victoria, why am I the one you're calling?" The The line went quiet, heavy with a mixture of resentment and defeat. "Fine," she said finally, her voice stripped of pretense. "We'll pay it. Can you come in this afternoon?" I glanced at the clock, let the silence hang just long enough to taste the shift in power, and said, "I can be there by 1. When I ended the call, I caught my reflection in the glass cabinet. I wasn't just returning to Nixora, I was walking back with all the leverage in the world. The conference room at Nixora looked like a battlefield when I walked in. Empty energy drink cans clustered on the table. Tangled printouts of my code were scattered across every surface, and 3 exhausted consultants stared at their laptops as if praying for divine intervention. The hum of the HVAC and the muted ping of error alerts filled the tense air. Ben, the youngest looking of the trio, glanced up with a mixture of relief and embarrassment. "Maris, thank God you're here," he said, dark circles under his eyes. "We've been trying to stabilize the platform. We, streamlined some of your architecture." I arched an eyebrow and set my bag down. "Streamlined?" He hesitated. "We removed some redundant checks, disabled caching to simplify database calls, the load balancer. Well, we thought it was overcomplicated, so we rewrote parts of it." I stepped closer to his screen and scrolled through the log files. Each line was a quiet confession of the system's suffering. Routing delays, data collisions, and silent corruptions piling up like snow on a collapsing roof. My fingers traced the highlighted changes on the printouts, and the picture became painfully clear. "You didn't streamline anything," I said, my voice calm but cold. "You dismantled the foundation that kept the system alive. Every so-called inefficiency you stripped out was a safeguard against exactly what's happening right now." The 3 of them exchanged uneasy glances. I let the silence settle before continuing. "You treated a living system like a pile of spare parts. You removed the heart and are now wondering why the body can't stand." Ben swallowed hard. Can you fix it?" I let my gaze sweep over the room, taking in the panic, the wreckage of my work, and the faint glimmer of understanding dawning on their faces. They finally grasped what Victoria never had. I wasn't just a coder. I was the architect, the only one who could rebuild the machine they had tried to tame and nearly killed. I pulled out a chair and opened my laptop, feeling the quiet surge of control return as my fingers hovered over the keys. Once I had the logs and access keys in hand, the repair work became a familiar rhythm, almost meditative. While the consultants hovered anxiously, I moved through the wreckage of my own design with precision, line by line. I restored the load balancer they had torn apart, re-enabled caching to stabilize the database, and rewrote the error-handling protocols that kept bad data from spreading like a virus. By the end of the first day, the system had stopped hemorrhaging. By the 3rd, it was running cleaner than it had in months. Victoria lurked at the doorway several times, her usual steel chipped away into quiet desperation. She never interrupted my work, just watched the graphs stabilize and the red alerts fade into green. I could see in her eyes the dawning realization this wasn't luck, and it wasn't magic. It was expertise she'd tried to replace with fresh blood. When the final test run completed without a single failure, I closed my laptop and leaned back. "The system's stable," I said, "if you want it to stay that way. We need to formalize a consulting agreement." Victoria hesitated only a moment before nodding. In the small conference room, I laid out my terms as easily as if I were reciting a grocery list. Emergency support is $300 an hour. Planned maintenance or new development is $200 an hour. And any new modules I create remain my intellectual property. Those are the conditions. Her lips parted, but no protest came. She signed. The consultants glanced at each other, quietly impressed and slightly stunned. I left the building that evening with a contract in my bag and an entirely new sense of freedom in my chest. The anger that had once simmered under my calm exterior was gone. In its place was something far lighter, sharper leverage. I wasn't an employee anymore, waiting for someone else to decide my worth. I was a free agent, and they were paying a premium for every hour I chose to care. As I walked to my car under the warm Austin evening sky, I felt a clarity I hadn't known in years. I wasn't just back in control of the system, I was in control of my life by the end of the week. The fleet management platform hummed like it had been reborn. Dispatches went out cleanly, ETAs aligned to the minute, and the panic that had once gripped the operations floor faded into an uneasy calm. I wrapped up my final walkthrough with the consultants, showing them the routines they'd need to follow to keep the system stable. When I stood to leave, Victoria intercepted me in the hallway. "Maris," she said, softer than I'd ever heard her, "I owe you an apology. I underestimated you. And the system. I'd like to make this right. We can create a principal architect role full-time, top salary, your own team." I watched her carefully, taking in the humility that had replaced her polished authority. It might have felt good months ago, but now it was only proof that the balance of power had shifted. "Thank you," I said, "but I like consulting. I have other clients now, and the flexibility suits me." Her smile faltered, but she nodded. We both knew the truth. I was more valuable on the outside than I had ever been on the inside. Over the next month, I formalized what had already begun. I registered my own boutique consulting firm, focused on logistics system architecture. Word traveled quickly in the Austin tech community. Within weeks, I had 2 new clients, both regional logistics companies eager to avoid the disaster Nexora had endured. Ironically, Victoria's company became my most profitable client. She called when she needed me, signed off on every invoice without question, and spoke to me with a measured respect she'd never given an employee. I spent my mornings choosing which projects to take, my afternoons advising from coffee shops or sunny patios, and my evenings without the weight of someone else's deadlines pressing against my chest. I wasn't chasing revenge anymore. I had built a life where no one could ever put me under their thumb again. 6 months later, my life had settled into a rhythm I'd once only imagined. I worked from my home office or a sunlit corner of a cafe, taking calls with clients who respected my time because every hour had a price. My income was 4 times what Nexora had once paid me, yet I worked fewer hours, choosing projects that intrigued me instead of ones handed down intense Monday meetings. Victoria called occasionally. Her voice was always measured now, stripped of the clipped arrogance that used to mark every sentence. She never questioned my invoices, never pushed for discounts, never tried to slip an urgent task into my schedule without paying the rate. I was no longer an employee she could command. I was a line item that bought her peace of mind, and that peace wasn't cheap. One soft spring afternoon, I walked through Zilker Park in downtown Austin, the air warm with the smell of cut grass and blooming crepe myrtles. Children laughed by the fountain, and a breeze tugged at the edges of my light jacket. My phone buzzed in my pocket with an incoming call from Nexora. I didn't even check who it was before silencing it and slipping the phone away. I paused under a live oak, looking out at the river glinting under the sun, and let the thought settle fully in my chest. The best revenge wasn't watching them fail. It wasn't the consulting fees, or the panicked phone calls, or the quiet apologies. The best revenge was this building a life so free, so firmly my own, that I would never have to go back. True expertise writes its own value, and the market never forgets. In the end, I hadn't needed to raise my voice, fight for recognition, or prove my worth in a meeting room. All I had needed was time, patience, and the quiet confidence that eventually absence speaks louder than anything else.